So, of course, I'd like to say thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're talking about what's new in Onshape. And if you haven't been attending our webinars regularly, we do once a month a What's New webinar to highlight the things that were added in the month before. So, we have two updates to discuss today, a lot of different things to show you. So, we're going to jump right into it. Now, as I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in your GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to type in any question, and I'll do my best to stop and address them as we're going through this. So again, feel free. We like to make these as interactive as possible. Now, for those new to Onshape, one of the first things that I like to discuss is our mission, and our goal with Onshape is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. This includes mobile devices. We have an Android and iOS app, a full functioning, mobile app. We also run on any platform, Windows, Mac, Linux, even Chromebooks, you can access your CAD data. So working together with CAD on any device, anywhere, that's our goal. Now, the other thing that I always like to point out is we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, it's, of course, parts, assemblies, and drawings. And we do have all three major pieces that make up a professional 3D CAD system. However, there are a lot of things with Onshape that are really unique and set us apart from a lot of other CAD systems. One of the first that I like to point out is very much what we're talking about here today, frequent updates. With Onshape, you get roughly every 3 weeks an update, and new features are being added. And the neat thing is you don't have to do anything. You log in and new features will be there. So there's no downloads, no installs, no updates. You simply log into your Onshape account and new stuff will be there. And that's roughly every 3 weeks. So unlike another, traditional file-based CAD system where you have one big installation a year, you never have to do anything, and constantly features are being added to Onshape. And this means we're going to evolve very quickly. Now, the other thing I always like to point out about Onshape is with Onshape comes built-in version control. So you don't have to have a separate data management system or something managing files. That concept is gone in Onshape. We have the ability to control versions, and we have a complete audit trail with history. So you never have to worry about separate data management application just to manage files. Now, also with Onshape comes the ability to import and export a lot of common CAD formats that are out there. So Step, IGES, Parasolid, even native formats, SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, CATIA. We can import and export a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there. It means Onshape works well alongside another CAD system, maybe to communicate with a vendor, perhaps. You can use Onshape in all kinds of different scenarios because we have this ability to work with your existing CAD data. The other thing I always like to point out, entirely new methods of collaboration. If you haven't shared your document in Onshape, I definitely recommend it. You have real-time simultaneous collaboration if you share. You can have integrated comments and you communicate inside of a document if you share. You can even see each other's screens with follow mode if you share your document. So entirely new methods of collaboration, real-time simultaneous editing between users, comments, follow mode, all kinds of very cool stuff to help you collaborate with others. The last thing I want to mention is customization with feature script. With Onshape, you have a truly customizable feature set. We publicly released the source code for our own features, and you can take that and build your own custom feature that looks and behaves just like Onshape native features. So you can really do some neat stuff, build your own custom feature using feature script. So these are just some things I always like to point out about Onshape in general to those new users out there. Now, the goal today, of course, is to talk about updates and how do we manage the new things that come into Onshape. The update process is roughly every 3 weeks. So roughly every 3 weeks, you're going to see new features being added to Onshape. Now, we have a blog post. We do a once-a-month webinar like you're seeing here today. So there are a lot of different ways that you can find out about it. The neat thing is they're totally automatic and transparent to the end user. So you don't have to do anything. You just log in and new features will be there. Literally refreshing your browser could add new features if you happen to be using it during an update. So it always means that, of course, the big benefit is everyone's always on the latest version. There's no version compatibilities in Onshape. There's only one version, and that's the latest. And these updates, of course, include new functionality. These aren't just bug fixes, but they're also new functionality that's going in. So we're going to discuss that new functionality here today. Let's jump into it. Now, quick question. Can you import Geomagic design files into Onshape? I do not believe we can import Geomagic design native files, but there's a chance you could export out of Geomagic as something that we can import. Step, IGES, and Parasolid would be the top 3 on that list. But I do not believe we can import native Geomagic design files. Okay, so this is a brief background on our update process. Roughly every 3 weeks, totally automatic and transparent, and it means that everyone's always on the latest version. Now, the new functionality is what we're here to talk about today. And the goal today is really just to go over 2 updates that happened in August. So on August 3rd, we had an update, and on August 24th, we had an update to Onshape. So 2 in the month of August. And what I'd like to do, we don't have necessarily the time to cover everything in a lot of detail, is I want to go over as many as I can in the time that we have for this webinar and just pick the important ones. So pick a few important improvements to walk through. And of course, as I mentioned before, answer any questions that you have. So feel free to ask any questions as we're going through this. Question: how do I import a Part Studio from one document into another? You can use the derived feature, just the insert command. You'll see a browse documents in either insert or derived. You'll have that browse documents, or you can browse to another part from a different document. Okay, so let's move on. Now, the first update that I want to discuss happened on August 3rd. So on August 3rd, we pushed an update and included all of these features plus more. And there are many little things that are added, as I mentioned before, little details, bug fixes, and others that go into it. But these are the features that you'll notice as of August 3rd. So some big ones that are worth mentioning: assembly, linear, and circular pattern. So you can now do linear patterns of parts and circular patterns of parts at the assembly level. Also a new parallel mate that allows you to define 2 mate connectors as parallel, but still allows it to move in any other direction. Also with this update added section view end cap. So when you're in the section view command, you can now see the edges or the end caps of the parts. Makes the section view look a lot nicer. Also labels. This is a frequently requested one. You can now tag documents with labels, and it allows you to easily filter for those documents. And I'm going to show you this in just a bit. Isolate improvements, very simple one, but it allows you to grab, based on connectivity or distance, other parts than the part you isolated. Very neat. And social cues on the documents page. So if you are sharing with someone else, you can see it on the documents page that someone else is in that document. So very neat little cue while you're on the documents page. Hey, someone else is in there. Maybe I'll jump in the document too. Now, with both of these updates, the 3rd and the 24th, there were many drawing improvements. And I'm saying many. In fact, each one has its own slide. So I have a separate slide for the drawing improvements, and I will go through those as well. Question: will you eventually integrate a SOLIDWORKS type toolbox with international standardized parts and components? Will this be left for the add-on community? It's already done. The App Store, the add-on community which you're referring to, has already built. In fact, we have, I think, 3 different options for standard library nuts and bolts. Now, will we ever eventually have it on our own? It's hard to say for sure. Right now, anybody using Onshape looking for a standard library of nuts and bolts, I would recommend the 3DX app or the Cadenas app in the Onshape App Store. Both of those, hundreds of millions of standard hardware parts that you can easily search and then drag and add into your document. Okay, so let's jump into this. Now, as I mentioned before, probably the biggest improvement, at least in my opinion, is the assembly, linear, and circular patterns. And so I'd like to jump into a simple example of that. Now, this is, a simple, I want to pattern a part along this direction, a given amount, and given instance count. And so for a lot of users, this is a very easy way to do simple patterns of parts along, an edge, for example. Now, the commands that we're looking for, you'll see 2 new commands in your assembly toolbar: assembly linear pattern, assembly circular pattern. We'll start with assembly linear pattern. I select the part I want to pattern, in this case, the V block. I choose a direction to pattern along, in this case, an edge parallel to the direction that you want to pattern. So I left click an edge, for example, and then set your spacing and instance count. You see distance, let's set that to 6, and instance count 2, that's fine. In my case, I need to go the opposite direction. So I'll click opposite direction, and now I have the V block on the other side. Okay, so I've patterned that V block. Now the question then comes up, well, can I take something that belongs to a pattern and pattern it as well? The answer is yes. So I could take these, for example, We'll do another linear pattern. We'll pattern the V block, the frame piece, as well as the other V block. This time, this direction, we'll say spacing or distance of 12, instance of 5. Okay. And so now it's patterning the frame piece plus the two V blocks at 12-inch distances, 5 instances of them. Okay. So very simple linear pattern. Just keep that in mind. At the assembly level, you can now do linear patterns of parts and, of course, linear patterns and circular patterns, which I'll show you in just a second. One thing I always like to point out is in the instance count in your assembly, you will have the linear pattern as a feature, which means you can right-click and edit it and make any changes that you want to. Question: how can you use this to create a grip surface on a flat face? It's hard to give specific advice, depending on an individual part. What I would look into is the loft command and the spline command. So those are the two things I would look into. Of course, I don't necessarily have time to go into great detail on those things today, but check out those two commands. Question: does it also keep the constraints? Well, it's important to keep in mind in the case of a linear pattern, the linear pattern is driving the position and so on. Right? So it's a simple value of 12-inch distance, 5 instance count. That's the constraints for the geometry, right? So it's not, if the part is mated in place, it will constrain that. If it's not, it won't. So important to keep in mind. As you can see here, mine is not mated and it's free to drag. Can one pattern along a curved path? The answer is yes. At the Part Studio, there is a special feature. It's a feature script feature, a custom feature called Curve Pattern that will allow you to pattern along a curve. I would definitely go to our webpage. Under CAD, you'll find feature script, and there's a whole series of examples, one of them being a curve pattern. That's the one I would check out. Okay, so that's a simple example of the assembly level linear pattern. Again, simple distance, instance count, and select your parts, right, along a direction. Now, the other one I mentioned is a circular pattern, and like you can imagine, like the name implies, instead of patterning along a direction, you're patterning around an axis. So you're defining, what it is that I want to rotate a certain series of parts around. So here's a simple example. I have this pneumatic cylinder, and I have a tie rod and a nut that needs to be patterned all the way around. I need 3 more instances, 4 total. So this is a great example of the circular pattern, assembly circular pattern. Again, same steps as before. You first start by selecting what it is that you want to pattern. In this case, the tie rod and the nut on each end of this cylinder. Right? So select the parts I want to pattern. Then I define what do I want to pattern around. What is the axis of pattern? And very similar to doing a circular pattern at the part level, for example. I want to be able to define, this is my rotation point for the circular pattern. Just select any circular edge or cylindrical face. So in this case, the center is the center of this circle. So I'll left click that as my axis of pattern, and it will go through and create the pattern instance. Now, right now, I only have 2, my original plus the second one, and that's because the instance count is set to 2. I can set that to 4, and now I have all 4 sets of tie rods plus the nuts that complete them. Okay. So a big tip that I have in these types of situations where you want to pattern around an axis or a circular pattern or pattern along a direction, that would be a linear pattern. You can do that at the assembly level. Question: usually it's preferred to follow the V block to be patterned at the distance of the bars. May I presume that it can pick up the distance of the bars? Yes, but it's important to point out not at the assembly level. In the Part Studio, you can absolutely do that. You can drive, for instance, the pattern by something other than a simple value. The assembly linear pattern, assembly circular pattern are just a simple distance and instance count, or angle and instance count. Okay, but you can have it update so that if I made the thing longer, it would auto increment the number of bars and the number of V blocks. I can do that at the Part Studio level, absolutely. Okay, so that is an assembly level circular and linear pattern that was added on the 3rd of August. let's jump back real quickly and to the next one on August 3rd, which is a parallel mate. So if you have any type of scenario where I want these two parts not necessarily touching, but parallel, but it needs to be free to move in any other direction, that's a parallel mate. And this was added on August 3rd. And this one, very simple to show. Here I have this hexapod. You can see that, this is free to move in all kinds of different directions. So if I grab and pull, it's free to move basically in any direction. But what I'd like is the two plates to be parallel, but it's still free to move around. So this is a great example of a parallel mate. Again, select parallel mate from the toolbar. You'll see the new icon here. Then select the two mate connectors. You can select this one and this one. Okay. We'll solve, and you'll see it maintains a parallel relationship. So if I grab and drag, no matter what position I move this to. So I can move it up, down, left, or right, and it will maintain that parallel orientation between the two. Okay. Question, can I use an array to drive a linear pattern spacing? To be honest, I haven't tried that. I would have to try that myself. I saw that recently posted on the forums. I'm not certain that you can, but give me a moment at the end of the webinar. I'll give it a shot myself. Okay, so this is a parallel mate. This was added on August 3rd. You'll see the new icon in the assembly toolbar for parallel mate. Again, anytime you want to keep two parts parallel, but not necessarily touching each other, but free to move in any other direction. Okay, so let's move on. The next thing I want to mention, and this is a real simple one to show, is the section view end caps. So while in the section view command, if I were, let's jump into a Part Studio here. If I were to do a simple section view, in the past, what you may have noticed is that the edges weren't very clearly defined. So let's do a section down the right. What you'll notice with this update, with the August 3rd update, is that the edges, what's referred to as the end caps of the section view, are now detailed. And this is a small thing that makes section views a lot cleaner. So now in your section view command, you'll see the end caps, or what some refer to as the edges of the section view, very clearly now. In the past, this wasn't as obvious. And it meant that section views didn't really have as clean a detail as they could have. Right, so a simple thing, it's just on in the section view command. You turn on section view, and you'll notice now these end caps, or the edges, are more definable, clearer. So that is section view end caps. That's another important improvement. Now the next one I want to mention is labels. Now I see a few questions, so bear with me. Questions. If you pattern the assembly by adding bolts around, you also pattern the holes on the flanges? If so, no. It's important to point out, if I were to pattern, for instance, all the holes around, I would need to make sure that the appropriate holes are there in the Part Studio. So it is not going back to add holes in the example of a flange that you mentioned. Okay, you'll need to make sure the holes are there. Is there a way to delete all constraints while keeping the parts, then freeze those parts from further editing? You can certainly delete all the constraints. You can show constraints in a checkbox and delete them. It wouldn't be a very fast process. You can, I want to point out, you can create a version in Onshape that can never be changed. And that would, quote unquote, freeze those parts, freeze the state of everything, parts, assemblies, drawings, everything for that version. So that's what, if you're looking for a way to capture a moment and never have it edited again, that's what I would recommend, a version. Question, while section view hatching scale, there's no way to define that as of today. Will you be able to save section views eventually? Will we be able to save section views eventually? I don't know that that's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by save. Maybe save them as a custom view. That's something that I would definitely recommend. If that's what you're referring to, give us feedback. Let us know that. So, can the end cap colors be changed independent of the material of the part? Yes, absolutely. The appearance and the materials are two different things in Onshape, so you can change the appearance and still have a material that doesn't necessarily reflect that appearance. So all right, so let's move on now. Labels is a very big one, and a lot of the improvements with this update and the next update really kind of have to center around organization of your documents and how you can organize big documents. And one of the first and biggest is labels. So in the documents page, when you first log into Onshape, there are two new things to notice. You have a new label icon on the left, and you have a label dropdown on the top right. Essentially, think of labels as a way of tagging documents. So if I had three or four, five projects that were all under a certain project, maybe, or all under a certain organization, or all under a certain category of things that we make, for example, I can create a label and then tag the documents with that label. Now you may ask, well, what's the benefit of doing that? And the answer is it's easy to filter by them. So sometimes this list can get overbearing, finding the document that you're looking for. And we've made a few notable improvements, the first one being the labels. So I can click Create New Label, create a label, let's call it Project A, click Create, and then I can go through and tag documents with that label. All right, so I want to select a few documents perhaps, and then click Project A. Now they're all tagged with that new label. Now, the big benefit here is it makes it easy for me to click the label and see the documents associated with it. So I don't have to do any special naming conventions and then searches, or it's really a way of organizing documents, and that's the way to think of it. So you have a simple label capability that allows you to tag documents with a label. Now, to remove a label, or remove a tag of a label, I should say, just uncheck. Right? So now this document is no longer related to that label. You can also delete or rename in the right-click menu. So if you right-click the documents list as the label in the documents list, you'll see rename and delete as well as a create new. So a label, I think, is an effective way of organizing. Some, like to refer to this as like a folder. I have this top-level folder, and then I have all these projects within it. You can use labels in a very similar way. Okay, so a big improvement. This is meant, when most users log in, they get something like their My Documents list, which this list can be very long. You can have endless documents in here depending on how you choose to organize things. So labels just an easy way to kind of categorize your documents. So that is labels. That was added on August 3rd, a very important option. Now, a question that's come up, and a very good one, is there a subfolder option? And the answer is no. Right now, it's just the single level label. Okay, keep an eye out for the future. Right now, it's just that single level. Okay, so moving on. Now, the next improvements that I want to discuss are the isolate improvements, and these are relatively simple to demonstrate. Let me find the circular pattern example I had a moment ago. Now, in the isolate command, if you're not familiar with it, it just allows you to isolate a single or a set of parts among the assembly or part studio. So if I right-click a part, I have options. Let's jump into the assembly, I should say. So in the assembly level, let's do a quick right-click and isolate. Now, if you're not familiar with it, isolate does, like the name implies, it isolates that one part and then leaves you with everything else in this transparent display. Now, what's neat about that is, of course, you can select a number of parts and then see inside of your assembly, for example. But one thing I always like to point out, and it's especially useful in these types of assemblies where you may want, this part plus the things that are attached to it, is you have options for expanding. So in the isolate, you have this drop-down option to choose connectivity, and this is based on the parts that are mated to the thing that you've isolated, or distance, and that's based on its proximity to other parts. So I can say connected, drag the slider, and it will automatically then start grabbing the things that are mated to the part that I've isolated. So I can grab this and drag it, and you can see more and more parts are showing up until I get all of them there at the end. Now, the other way to do this is with distance, and this will allow you to isolate parts based on their proximity to the part that I've selected. So I can then drag this, and you'll see the things that are immediately attached to it show up, and then I drag it a little bit further, and the things that are a little bit away from it show up. And the further I go in this slider, the more and more parts appear based on how close they are to that part that I've isolated. So you'll see there as I'm dragging, the last few parts appear as I drag all the way to the right. So this is an option in the isolate command. If you're looking for an easy way to grab the mated parts or maybe the parts that are really close to something, it's an easy way to do it without having to select them individually beforehand, right? You can just grab the slider and drag it. It's a very cool effect and something that makes it easy to dig down into bigger assemblies and find and work on just the parts that you're interested in. So that's a big one for the isolate. This drop down for expand, you have the slider, and again, connectivity based on the mates associated with the parts that are connected to it, or distance based on the parts that are closest to it. All right, so question. If I label a public document, is the label public also? No, the labels are only visible to yourself. Okay, so moving on, the next one I want to mention, jumping back to my slide here, is social cues on the documents page. And this one ties into social cue enhancements in general. I have a few to mention. So let's jump into a document here and do a quick share. And what I want to point out here, if I share my document, all right, let's do a share. If anyone else is in that document, of course, you get the social cues while you're in the document, right? So I can see the little icon while I'm in the document, but also on the documents level, on the documents page, you'll see it here as well. So just keep in mind, if I select this, I can see that someone else is in the document in the actual details flyout. So on the right here, you can see the people that are in this document. Okay. And it's a neat way at a glance to be, jumping through your documents, see, oh, so-and-so's in this document. Maybe I'll jump into it and add a comment or see what they're up to. All right. So from the documents page at a glance, you can see who else happens to be logged into that document at that time. Okay. So that's one important improvement to sharing and the cues that we get that others are in the document. There's another one in the next update that I want to mention that's especially helpful for feature script users. So let's jump into it now. As I mentioned before, in both the August 3rd and the August 24th improvements, the updates, there were a lot of drawing improvements. And so what I've done is tried to kind of set them aside as different slide decks, or different slides, I should say, just to go through each one. And the list, especially for the next update, is very big. So for the August 3rd update, there were a number of different drawing improvements. I've highlighted the top three, I think, and the first one being jogged section views. You can now create jogged section views in drawings. Very easy to do. In the section view command, you can now click as many points as you want. So if I start a horizontal section, for instance, I can pass through this hole. And if all I'm looking for is a simple section view, I'm done. I can move it and click and then place it. But if I want a jogged section view, I can move my cursor to another point, click it, and now I'm jogging the section view. Right? And you can add as many points as you want. So I can keep going and create this, jogged section view with a number of points. Once you're done, just move your cursor outside the view and you'll see it. Right? Left click to, of course, place it. But a simple jogged section view, again, the key there is that second click. While you're creating it, that second click will jog it based on that point. So simple jog section view. Keep in mind, if all you want is a normal section view, you don't have to change anything. Just left click and it gives you a simple normal section view. But if you want it jogged, just click another point on that view and it will jog it to that point. So that is the jogged section view. The next improvement that I want to mention is changing the sheet size. So while in a drawing, you can go into your sheet properties and edit the sheet size. This is something that we get asked quite often. Once I create a drawing, what if it's too small, or what if it was too big and I need to change it? Now, if you go into your sheet properties, you have an option to choose which size you want. And this includes after you've created it, of course. And I think that's what most users are looking for. I initially created this. It was too small, too big, whatever it may be. I need to change it. Click Sheets, click the gear drop down, go to Properties, and you'll see the sheet properties, including the option to choose a different sheet size. Okay. So that is changing the sheet size. That was added on this August 3rd update. The last thing I want to mention is feet and inch units. And this is a particularly important one for those doing larger designs where feet and inch units are very popular, very common. In the properties, at the very bottom under length units, you'll notice a feet and inches option. So while you're creating your Onshape drawings, you can change the units to feet and inches. And this is a highly requested one. If you're doing that type of work, a very important option. So under properties, at the very bottom, length units, you'll find a feet and inches. Okay, so a few questions that have popped up. Can you import your SOLIDWORKS drawing templates or create new drawing templates for norms from other countries? You can import, you can use your SOLIDWORKS drawing template. It's important to point out there's a step between. I've seen SOLIDWORKS users export their template as a DWG and then rename it to DWT, for example, and import that, or open it and maybe make some changes in a 2D CAD software. We cannot import the direct SOLIDWORKS template file. It would need to be a DWT format. Now, you can take our drawing templates or create a new drawing and then export it as a DWT to build your own. Absolutely. So the second part of your question, you can build your own templates using our provided templates. You can export your SOLIDWORKS drawing as a certain format and use that as well. Okay, so these are just a few of the drawing improvements. Next question, can you later add or remove another drawing or another jog to the section? You can move them, but you cannot add. Not at this point. I'm fairly certain of that. You cannot go back and manipulate them later. I think that's still a limitation. Now, a question. This is a very good question. Correct me if I'm wrong. While in the jog section view you just performed, I believe you're missing a line where the jog happens. It's important to point out you have an option to show the cut lines, what's referred to as the cut lines. And this is a very good question. If you're in the camp that sees the jogged section lines as a line in the finished view itself, you'll want to right-click the view and say hide or show offset cut lines. So a very good question. I forgot to mention that earlier. If you want to see the line in the jogged or in the actual section view, hide or show offset cut lines is in the right click. Questions: when you're using feet and inches, can you use fractions rather than decimals? That's a good question. I do not believe so. I would need to try it myself. So if you would bear with me in the end, I'll give that a shot. Many global customers include hybrid dimensioning. Is there a plan to implement? Yes. The question then is do you foresee a scenario where include hybrid dimensioning or combined different formats, ANSI and ISO or millimeter and inch? And the answer is yes. We plan to support that, and that's a high priority for us, I would say. Okay, so that is, as I mentioned, jogged section views. We also showed changing the sheet size and feet and inch units. These are the three big improvements with the August 3rd update in terms of drawings. Now, what I'd like to get into next is the August 24th update. And this one brought a lot more in the form of organization. And I mentioned before, the big theme in August was how to organize your data in Onshape. And we definitely added a lot of new things that can help with that. Question: is there a way to move a projected view without the parent view? The parent view and the projected view are linked, and I do not believe it's easy to break them. Bear with me for just a moment. I believe you can right-click suppress and unsuppress align scale. That will give you what you're looking for. Forgive me. So in the right-click of a view that's projected off of another, you will have an align scale with parent, suppress and unsuppress option. When will you supply a standard materials database that allows them to be assigned to a part similar to SOLIDWORKS? Also, will there be ability to specify material that might not yet. We have a standard materials database today, and you can assign a standard material to any part in your part studio. So you can assign standard materials today. What we cannot do yet is specify a custom material. That's definitely something that's high on our list of priorities, but is not there yet. But keep in mind, we have standard library materials, a long list of them available today. You can right-click a part in the Part Studio, and you'll see assigned material. When do you think native freeform surface modeling will be implemented? I will say that in general, surfacing is very, very high on our list. I don't know about specifically freeform as a function of surfacing, but in general, surfacing capabilities are very high on our list of priorities. Question, if you create a section in the assembly, can you import the section to the drawing views screen? No, I have seen other users do a cut and accomplish the same thing. And it's very easy to do a cut. Can you edit the part drawing from the sheet? No. It's important to point out all part modeling is done from the Part Studio. Now, if you make a change to the part, the drawing will update. There's a big button to update it. So it's important to point out it's a one-directional thing. You make the changes at the Part Studio level, or the 3D model, and the drawing, you just click this button to update it. Okay, so moving into the August 24th update. Now, filters, labels, and likes are three very big things that a lot of users requested. So I do want to take a moment to discuss them. Now, the first being filters, and the big improvements with filters, there are a few, but probably one of the biggest that I want to point out is just the ability to search within a filter. So if I select a certain created by me filter and then I do a search, it will search within that filter, right? This is something that didn't happen in the past. So if you used the search, you would get searches that included public documents and a long list of things. So if I just did, my documents and did a search for gear, I would get a long list of different things, right? Let's do that. Search in recently opened. So here's a list just doing a search for gear, and you can see a long list of documents that I have, I'm not tied to in any way. These are just public documents that include gear in the name. So in the past, if you did a search, you would get this long list of things that may not be relevant to you at all. What I want to point out are two new things. If you click a filter first and then do a search, it searches within that filter only. So you don't get the long list of public documents. If you do any search and you find you're in the scenario where, I didn't want to see public documents, you can click the Search in My Documents list. And that will, of course, just filter by gears within your documents. So I just want to point that out. That's a frequently asked question. Our search has been greatly improved just by, the ability to search within the various filters. Okay, so when you do a search, you no longer get that long list of public documents, and you can quickly filter by My Documents or a team, for example. So maybe I wanted to look up a project name by, whoever belongs to the team, and so on. Question, any way to exclude My Public Documents? I do not believe so. Now, if you do a search by created by me and you happen to own public documents, it will show up in that list because they're created by you, even if they were public. There's not a particular way to say I want to exclude this from a search. Okay, so again, filters, a big improvement, just the ability to search within a filter. I think that's the one that I want to point out. Now, the other things that I always like to point out with this is, of course, we added the ability to do labels, and I mentioned that before, but also likes. And this is another way of filtering through the public document list. And this is just another frequently asked question. Is there a way to see the popular public models? Well, with this improvement, we added the ability to like public models. So here's a public pneumatic cylinder, and it has 22 likes. You'll see it on the right-hand side. If I want to like the document, I can click the thumbs up, and now I've liked that document. So it's an easy way to give a thumbs up to a document, say, hey, this is a good public model. And the neat thing is a user can filter public models by likes. So I can click likes here, the top, and now I'm looking at the most liked public documents. So from this 3D printer that's open source to a violin to a helmet mount for some electronics, differential gears, Iron Man, all kinds of cool models that, again, this is entirely user driven. So, you will see the public models kind of filter up to the top with this likes. Now, also with it comes links and copies. Links is how many times your document, your public document, or that public document has been linked to in other documents. So maybe inserted into other documents. And also how many times has it been copied. So you can see the number of copies on the document. It's a great way to get a feel for the popularity of public documents, and a big one that I want to point out. So that is likes, one that I like to point out. Definitely a neat way to sort public models. Okay. Can you searches use and or conditions? I do not believe so. And is there a way to search for attributes besides the document name? Again, I don't believe so. I can make models with more than 10,000 likes. Can you implement? Please make it and make it public. So the neat thing about likes is, again, the users drive what is popular there. So if you find something in the documents list, give it a thumbs up. It's an easy way for others to be able to filter by it and find it. Because, of course, there are many, many documents in the public list. So, all right, moving on. The next one on the list, profile image. Now, profile image is just a neat way to give your account more personalization. Maybe if you're communicating inside of comments or so on. Maybe, your Collaborator Cursor or so on. Under Manage Account, so in the top right, you have Profile. You can now add a image for your account. Some refer to it as an avatar, but essentially it's a picture for you. And this picture is visible in the Documents page. It's visible when you log into another document. It's visible in the graphics for the comments. So it's kind of throughout the various pieces where a user account might interact with something. And it's a neat way to see not just a letter, but their actual face. So if I'm working with 2 or 3 other people, I see their face, in that top right, and not just an icon, their letter. So adding your profile image to your account settings, again, under Manage Account, you'll find Profile. You click Change, and then you can browse and import a file. Okay. Question: is there a possibility of coming up with a prosumer pricing range, anything other than $20 to $30 a price range, perhaps with more limited storage and private documents? I will say not at this moment. That's something that's always been mentioned before in the past. I think when you compare us to other professional CAD systems, we're definitely very reasonably priced. For $100 a month, you can sign in and create unlimited documents. So, in terms of upfront cost with comparison to other professional CAD systems out there, I definitely think we're very reasonable. The other thing I always like to point out is you can have unlimited public documents. So you're really paying for privacy, in the case of Onshape Pro. Unlimited public documents is a great deal, again, if you don't mind, sharing your property, your intellectual property with the world. But if you need privacy, the Onshape Pro account is definitely worth it. And the other thing is, we don't require you can sign up and then discontinue the account when you don't need it. So moving on, the next thing I want to mention is company teams and search. So if you're in a company, in the Manage Account settings, you can now do a search for users within the company. I don't have an example of that. We're just going to move past it, but I do want to point that out. You can now search for users within the company. The other one is tab folders, and this is a particularly important one to a lot of users out there. If you have a complex assembly with dozens of parts, hundreds of parts, sub-assemblies, drawings everywhere, it can be a mess in terms of the tabs across the bottom. So what I'd like to point out with this update was the ability to organize the various tabs across the bottom with folders. So you can click the plus icon and the insert new element icon, the plus icon on the bottom left, and you'll see an option to create folder. Click create folder, and it adds a new folder to your list. Let's call it parts. Right. And then I can drag and drop tabs into that folder. right? So I can drag and drop different pieces of it. Maybe here's a step file I wanted, and you can organize the tabs in any way you see fit. You can name them any way you see fit. It's just a way to organize the various pieces of your document. So here I've got, 3 or 4 parts, some imported geometry, maybe from another CAD application, all within this parts folder. Now, when I left click that folder in the list, it then expands what's in it. So you'll notice the interface changed just a bit. You have this home icon, and then I have the part folder that I'm in, the parts folder that I'm in. If I want to go back to the overall list, I click the home, and it takes me back to that list. Right? So again, just a way of organizing your various tabs. As you start to get a lot of tabs in your document, putting them in folders is an important thing to do. It also works, of course, at the tab manager level. So if I click the tab manager, I can see the various folders. I can expand out. You can even create subfolders. That's another commonly asked question. Yes, you can create subfolders. And again, you can see all of this from the tab manager as well. So just keep in mind, tab folders, very easy way to, kind of categorize and organize your parts, assemblies, drawings. I think a lot of users creating a parts folder, a drawings folder, maybe a standard hardware folder, and then just having that as a way to jump into those parts without having to look at the entire list of tabs across the bottom. So an important one, if you have rather large documents with maybe hundreds of parts and different sub-assemblies and so on, managing those tabs is now much easier. So again, the key thing, though, I want to point out, under the plus icon in the bottom left, you have the option Create Folder. Then just drag and drop tabs into that folder. Okay. Question, if I after unsubscribe, can I still view the parts? Yes, you can view them. You cannot edit, and that's the limitation. A user interface question, is there the ability to add text to the function icons? No. No, not today. Today they are just an icon. Now, I will say, if you hover your mouse over that icon, it will give you a breakdown. So I can see if I leave it there, it says Fasten Mate in a tooltip. It pops up, but there's no way to turn on text as options in the toolbar. Okay, so moving on. Now, the next thing on my list is versions from history. And this is just another frequently asked one from users. Is there a way to go back and create a version from some point in my history? Maybe I didn't think about it and we reached this point and we didn't capture it as a milestone. What do I do then? And so if you go into your versions, of course, you have your infinite history. So again, Onshape, there is no save icon, right? You'll see no save, and everything you do is stored. So I have the history here to show everything that I've done. The reason I bring this up is you can now go to any point in your history. Remember, your history is a step-for-step breakdown of the document. I can go back to any step in that history and say, create a version from this point. And so this is particularly helpful if you find, I wish we had captured revision A as it went out to the shop floor, but we didn't. Well, I can go back to a moment in history right at that point and say, create a version. So again, this option in the history under the gear dropdown to create version here is what was added. That was what was added on August 24th. And it means that you don't have to be a stickler about when versions were created. You can go back to moments in history and create them there. All right, so moving on, the next one in my list is feature diagnostics. And this one is a particularly helpful one if you find yourself not understanding why certain things are failing. And it's just meant to give a little bit of feedback when something doesn't work. And you'll see it for commands like extrude or fillet or shell, where you have something that fails, but it's not really clear exactly what it was. And in the past, you'd see the feature fail, and you'd get a message, something like did not regenerate properly. But it was never really clear what exactly about it had failed. So I want to give you an example. Let's say that I want to do a fillet. And I want to do, let's say, a 16th, 0.06. And I select a face. And initially, everything looks good. I select a face. It does a fillet. It looks great. I'm good to go. Now, I want to click the next feature. Right? Let's click the next face. What happens is the feature then fails. And you can see here, I see fill at 34. Is the moment it fails, it turns bright red in the feature list. What's new with this update is it will highlight in red the thing that's causing the failure. So in my case, I can see a radius here that's too small for a 16th fillet. And it's highlighting that radius in red. In fact, if I were to X out here and select individual edges, for example, it would then say, okay, no, this corner is a problem. So I'm selecting edges. I notice that it shows it also in the fillet dialog. So edge of extrude 2 is the one that's failing. So it shows it in red. It shows it, forgive me there, it shows it in the graphics. This is the face or edge or feature that's failing and why, right? So I can see that, the arc is too small. So it's just visual feedback, doing that one more time. As you're creating a feature, I select a face and I say, okay, let's do this one as well. I start selecting edges. The moment it fails, it will turn red. So you'll see it, the edge turns red in the list, it turns red in the graphics, and of course, as always, your fillet feature fails. So it's meant to be a little bit more visual feedback as to what the problem is. Again, you'll see this in fillet. You'll see it in shell. I have another example here of a simple shell. So let's do a simple shell of this grip. And I want to do a shell. Let's say, we'll leave it at 100 thousandths. Well, 100 thousandths is far too big for this shell. So if I select it, it's not going to work. It's going to fail. Now it highlights the geometry that will cause it to fail. So now I can see that the shell isn't working, and it highlights the various edges. And of course, I have a minimum curvature issue here with my shell, right? So the shell is too large for the faces and geometry I've selected. But now I can see it visually, right? And in the past, it was somewhat blind, so to speak. You didn't really know. I knew the shell failed and would say it failed to regenerate, but it wasn't clear what geometry was conflicting. Now it highlights in red. And you'll see this in the extrude command as well. So if I created a zero thickness extrude and I try to extrude it, it will highlight the edges of the zero thickness. So we're referring to it as feature diagnostics, but really just think of it as a way of visually telling you this is a geometry that's causing a conflict as you're creating your model. So that is feature diagnostics. The next one that I want to mention is Collaborative Cursor, or Collaborators Cursor in FeatureScript. So when you're in a FeatureScript document, a document that has a feature studio, you will now see their cursor as a visual cue, right? So if I select, a certain annotation, notice that I get the visual cue that person has in the document at this point. This is very similar to Google Docs. If you're familiar with Google Docs, when you collaborate on a single document, you can see each other's cursors. And of course, it's real time. So as I add text, you'll see it instantly update. If I remove text, you'll see it instantly update. So real time collaboration in the feature studios. But more importantly, now I can see where they're at in my feature studio. So again, you can see your collaborator's cursor. You can even see the text. You can see Cody there associated with that cursor. Just a visual cue. This is where they're working in the feature script. Okay. Again, just trying to make it consistent. If you haven't shared your document yet, you get the same thing when you share your document and other users are creating new features. So if you create a fillet while someone else is in the document, they'll see a little indication that you're working in it. So that is Collaborators Cursor and FeatureScript. The last thing I want to mention is, of course, the MiniDraw Improvements that came with this update. Now, there are quite a few. I'm not going to go through in great detail in all of them. One of the first and most commonly asked is, can you do things like flip dimension arrows? The answer is yes. If you double-click the dimension arrows, they will flip sides. And that's for radius dimensions, standard dimensions like this. If you double click the arrow, it flips. Okay. So flip dimension arrow, that's one of the first and most important with this one. Explode notes. Sometimes if you're going to another system, they have a hard time dealing with notes in particular. You can, forgive me there, you can now take a note and explode it. All right, and that will just turn it into a series of polylines. You'll see it in the right-click menu. So right-click your note, say explode, and that will convert it to a series of polylines, which any 2D CAD system can work with. If you've ever run into an issue with your notes when going to other 2D CAD systems, this may be something to pursue, exploding them. So right-click on a note, you have the option to explode. The next one, link dimension property to drawing's value. Remember that every drawing has a set, decimal length, for example, and Onshape itself is no different. What I want to point out here is in the dimension properties under the drop-down for dimension length, you'll see that it's set to drawing. So this is referring to the drawing properties. And the reason this is important is if you decide to change the decimal length to 4, let's say, all the dimensions that are linked to drawing automatically update. So the reason I bring this up is by default, all your dimensions will be set to drawing. Forgive me, I keep clicking the wrong one. Will be set to drawing. But you can set them to anything you want and override that. They will no longer update automatically if the drawing properties are then changed. Okay, so again, this option for drawing is what's new. It allows you to link it to the drawing properties. Now, if you haven't accessed those yet, you'll see the wrench icon on the top left. If you click properties, that's where your option for precision is. And this is a global setting, so to speak, for this drawing. And this is what you're setting it to, so to speak. Okay, so moving on, the next one in my list is exporting drawing templates, images in custom templates, and feet and inch units in custom templates. And I think you can get a theme here. We're really focusing on your ability to create your own custom template. And so with this update was the ability to export. If I right-click a tab and choose export, I can export as a DWT. This is a drawing template. If you've come from other 2D CAD applications, a very familiar format, it's your drawing template, DWT. And so this will take your active drawing, whatever it is, whatever tab that you're working on, it will take that and export it as a DWT, which you can then use as your drawing templates for further Onshape drawings. So better support in terms of DWT. If you right-click DWT, or should say right-click export DWT, you'll see that you can export a drawing template. Now, with the ability to do exporting as a drawing template or exporting as your own custom template, you can also include images in custom templates. So maybe you want to add a company logo to your drawing and then export that as a template so that it's always there. And you can set feet and inch units in custom templates. And that means that it's a default setting when you use that template in the future. Okay. So again, just keep in mind, you can export your Onshape drawings as a DWT file, which is a template file, which can then be used for future templates, or future drawings, I should say. And you can include your own company images, or I should say any image. You can include any image, and you can also set the units to feet and inches as a default. Okay. So a number of drawing improvements that came with this update, a long list. I think a lot of heavily, user requested features have been added with these two updates. And that's really what I had planned for you. Just jumping back real quickly, going forward, if you just getting started with Onshape, I really encourage you to try Onshape in your professional environment. Let us know what you think. Try it in a professional project and give us your feedback. Also, encourage you to invite others and share. There's a share tool built into the top right corner. You click share, you enter their email address, define their permissions, and that's really it. They don't have to download or install anything. They click a link and they're looking at the same model as you. So invite others, share. We really encourage you to do that. A lot of big benefits come from collaborating in Onshape. The last thing I want to mention is if you're interested in meeting local users or interested in establishing a user group, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you set things up. So that's what I had planned. I know there are a few outstanding questions, so bear with me. But if you don't have any questions, I want to say thank you again, everyone, and have a good day. Questions. Does that work for trailing zeros or default decimal places? It will not let me try that real quickly. And forgive me, I may be misunderstanding the question here. It will add a trailing 0 if I set it to 3 decimal places. So in this case, I have 2.25, but because it's 3 decimal places, I have the trailing 0 there. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding that question. Are there any plans for a utility which can automate the modeling of cable wiring in an assembly? We do have a tool today under our feature script page for wiring. So if you go to Onshape under CAD, you'll find feature script. There's a whole bunch of examples here. If you haven't checked out this page, by the way, one of them is specifically dedicated to creating wiring. So I would definitely check out this custom feature. Are there string variables likely to be implemented soon? I have heard discussion of that, but I can't say with any certainty the timeline. I will say that others have mentioned it. I would use the feedback, if you haven't already, to let us know if that's a very important thing to you. I don't have a specific time frame. I will say that it's been mentioned. I've heard it mentioned before. Are there any A4 boxes templates to use? There are A4 templates, absolutely. Onshape provides A4, or really any A size, any ISO size, a generic template to start from, and then you can use that to build your own. But yes, there is a Onshape provided list of templates, including size A4. How can I attach a profile geometric tolerance to an extension line and a dimension? That's a good question. It does not attach. Give me just a moment. I'm trying this myself just to make sure I'm not missing something. Now, I will say when you're dragging, there are points that it can attach to, but it does not remain attached. So as you're grabbing and dragging a geometric tolerance symbol in a drawing, you do have the attachment points, but it's not attaching to the dimension as if it were an entity and then moving with it. You would need to position them as separate things. Questions. Can you display fractions on drawing dimensions? This is a good question. I believe this came up earlier. If you set it to feet and inches, I'm fairly certain it does that. So just to test real quickly here, I set this to feet and inches, and now I get fractions. So try the feet and inch length units if you're looking for fractions. I would love to see more surface features coming. Is that something you're planning? Absolutely. Surfacing in general, surface features in general is very, very high on a list of priorities. I will say that we have everything we have in solid features, we have in surface geometry. So extrude, revolve, sweep, loft are all available as surfacing features today. And our loft command has a lot of really good match curvature, match tangency, to do a lot of very neat things in terms of giving you smooth curvature and surfacing. So we do have plans to add a lot of new surfacing features, but there's a lot there today that's definitely worth checking out. Question: will you be able to try an example of the rate spacing? Give me just a second, and I will try it. So bear with me for a moment. Question has come up. When in the isolation mode, is it possible to adjust the percentage of visibility of the non-isolated areas? No, that you can't adjust the transparency level of those parts. I believe this is what you're asking, so forgive me if it's not. We can't adjust that yet, how opaque, so to speak, they are. Is there a way to grab a screenshot? Um, there's not. I mean, of course, there are hundreds of screenshot tools out there. Um, you can go under the document menu in the top right or top left, excuse me. So in the three lines here, you'll see a document menu and print, and I can do a simple print. So that will grab a screenshot, so to speak. So that may be what you're looking for. Of course, there are hundreds of apps that will grab a screenshot, and any operating system also has that ability too. Question: Can I show the sketch geometry in the drawing? No, you cannot show sketch geometry in the drawing. When working with SolidWorks parts and assemblies, what's the best way to get the model back into SolidWorks? When working with SolidWorks, what's the best way to format to use? Parasolid, or you can export as a SolidWorks part. That's an option too. Parasolid is the kernel of SolidWorks and Onshape, so it's probably your best solution if SLD PRT isn't an option. Okay, so forgive me. I know that I have an outstanding question there on variables, and give me just a second. Um, this is a question from earlier, Jackson. I do have a document here. Give me just a second. I'm showing my screen. Um, so here's a simple example where you have two beams and you have, I want to pattern the beams between them. And I have all the various sizes. So I have size, 1, 2, 3, 4 for all my various variables, 36, 48, 60, and so on. So this is very similar to what you're asking. Now, the question then is, can I use the variable in the linear pattern? Yes. So here I'm using instance count that's set to pattern. Pattern is the variable, which is just a variable consisting of an array of sizes. So I believe the answer to your question is yes. If this is what you're asking, if I'm misunderstanding, let me know. But yes, so in this case, I have a variable that's an array, and I've linked that to the value for a simple linear pattern. Question, can I use it for the spacing, not the count? Yes, it's all the same. So in this case, you'll see distance is just another variable, spacing. Question, can you create curves by equations? There is a feature script feature I would check out called parametric surface and parametric curve. These are creating curves or surfaces based on equations. So these are two custom features written by the Onshape community that allows you to input an equation and get a curve or surface out of it. So parametric curve and parametric surface, you can use either of these today. You can add them as icons to your toolbar. Forgive me, on the feature script page, I should highlight that. So on our feature script page, you'll find parametric surface and parametric curve. All right, everyone. If there are no other questions, I want to say thank you and have a good day.